Welcome to another Learner's Mindset discussion. I'm Dwayne Harapnik, and my esteemed colleague is,
Alyssa Thibodeau.
once again, this is so much fun getting together to explore some ideas. And today, we're going to be looking at the notion of recycling the wrong.
Mm.
Recycling the wrong. Now, this is purely Talissa's synthesis of something we've been talking about for the last little while prior to getting ready to this. But over the last several years, this idea of people taking wrong ideas and simply repeating them and regurgitating them. Okay. And then at some point, arguing over these wrong cliches and getting split and getting annoyed. And so this idea of recycling the wrong is a problem that I think we face everywhere.
Yeah.
But what is that? What is recycling the wrong? Talissa, you have the ability to take a lot of what I've been talking about and synthesize it. So let's start out with your summary perspective on recycling the wrong.
I find that students who want to take, the easy way out, even adults or folks that we know want to take the easy way out. It's very easy to just regurgitate something you read and then maybe own that or make it your own. But are you really making it your own if you haven't done it justice and gone back and looked at some of the original research to see that is that really true? Is that really factual? And is that really true? I find that in the context of higher education, it just seems, we have students who do these things. They'll use chat GBT. I'm just giving an example, a variety of other sources to write papers, but it's just as simple as copy paste anything you find on the internet if you don't go back to the original source. So I think this begs a bigger question, though, and that is, are students able to ask the questions that they need to ask to be able to decipher what they're reading and how to connect the dots? So this opens up a much bigger, line of questioning in my head as a faculty member, but also as a dean. And I think about, are we facilitating learning environments that will allow students to ask the questions that they need to be able to see whether or not these sources are really truly good sources, or are we just, as humans, recycling what we see, regurgitating what we think we know, and trying to connect dots between wrong information, which leads to bigger issues and problems. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. It really does. And I really appreciate that starting point because you've given me a couple of opportunities to go in one of two tangents or maybe even three tangents, but they're all connected. And you'd mentioned, as an educator, we're researchers. That's what we do. We ask questions, we explore, we unpack things. But the important thing that I think you pointed out is that it's everywhere. It isn't just what we do as faculty or as a dean or as administrators or as researchers. It's everywhere. So not very long ago, I had a young gentleman who I've been working with, kind of mentoring, post a question on one of the discussion forums that a group of guys that I hang out with use. And he asked a very honest question about a potentially argumentative perspective, right? People have ideas, they have ideologies that they follow, or they have different perspectives. They line up on one side, there's left, right? There's all these different, camps, right? So he asked a question that, and that could sort of split the group into two. Okay. Oh, these people line up on this side of the question. These people line up on that side of the question. That's everywhere. We see that everywhere, right? We just spent the last several years being locked down in a scenario where a certain group said this, a certain group said that, and then there's all kinds of tussle in between. And we've seen that well before the past several years of the lockdowns. We have people who line up on one side of an issue or a question, and are they really just arguing wrongly about the cliches? And so when this young guy posted a question, I shared with him a post that I use in one of the courses that we had developed in the Digital Learning and Leading program that I still use in the Applied Digital Learning program, a course that deals with research and building a literature review. And this post is really about going to primary sources, right?
Yeah.
And I took this young gentleman through, I asked him to read the post, and then I sort of summarized the ideas that I read this Twitter feed, and then I followed the article, follow the Twitter feed to a link, and then that reporter had repeated something that's another reporter said, and I followed her link from that first reporter to the second reporter, went to that second reporter. He pointed to Malcolm Gladwell, who was talking about the 10,000 hour rule, but he was also talking about deliberate practice. And everybody was wrong. Everybody was repeating the wrong stuff, because I actually have read the book on, and I actually know the researcher, Anders Ericsson. I've been communicating with him off and on over the last several years about his work on deliberate practice. So I knew intimately how wrong people were at different levels, and they were simply recycling the wrong.
Yeah.
And people are basing business decisions, or they're lining up on one side of an argument on a recycled wrong. It's just fascinating. Now, this is sobering. This is a problem. How do we fix it? How do we fix it? And the reason I'm asking how we fix it is that both you and I know how to fix it, but our fix often is too much work. So before I talk about the fix that I recommend, I want to turn it back to you. So we recycle the wrong. I think I've given an example, right? And I could give many other examples. I was in another grad class with students, and it's so easy for students to recycle the wrong. One teacher in this particular class talked about the fact that students don't even know how to ask a question. They're so used to recycling and regurgitating content that they can't even ask questions, right? So that's an issue we need to address. But in terms of recycling the wrong, what are your initial thoughts on fixing it? How do we fix that? And then we'll go deeper.
Yeah, before I even could address the how do we fix this, because I want to go there. The first thing I think of is a default switch, right? It is so, and I'm going to go back to my first point. It is so easy to just kind of fall back into a default and oh, that must be it. Or think about an implicit bias or a belief system that you want to support or promote. It's easy to grab the wrong information if it supports your agenda. If it supports if it confirms something you believe or think. So I think of my natural default is I'm going to go with what I really believe and what I want to believe, and how that looks and how that's going to play into my future and what I'm looking to do. Right. So there's that bit. But to take it to the other side and ask, why in the world, or how in the world could we get this line of thinking transitioned? It goes back to ownership. To me, it goes back to a learner's mindset. It goes back to what level of that intrinsic capacity to learn do you inherit? Do you want to be a person that recycles the wrong? Do you want to be a person that goes back to the core belief or the spine, as I say, the spine of something, go all the way back, research it, know it inside out? Example, we write articles. We just finished an article on feedback. I would be remiss as a primary author to not include work from Sadler and a few of the other, I think John Hattie and feedback, some of the most important seminal authors in feedback. Why? Yeah, they might have had their perspective, maybe visibility in feedback, understanding and receptivity in feedback, but every single researcher or writer or student or anyone, graduate student, has that little bit of an edge or somewhere they're looking to go. So to me, there's a couple ways to look at this. One, if you're looking to make an angle or prove a point or go down that path of research, you might use particular work one over the other. But if you go back to a seminal author and really see for yourself what they're trying to convey, then you are in a position to change and impact what that looks like moving forward through your research, through your papers, through your graduate work, through your undergraduate work. You can then see how it connects with what you're looking to do and all the misinterpretations around you. Once you do that once, and you go back to that seminal researcher and you find out who that is and you start looking at the sources, you can start to see the importance, just do it one time, of going back to that seminal researcher. Because sometimes, and then maybe there's more than one, sometimes you have to recognize in yourself, am I trying to prove my own point and improve my own implicit biases? Or am I really trying to take that objective, this is what it is, and this, this is what feedback is, and this is how, I'm looking to change the world one learner at a time by using feedback. So you got to think about, your purpose and intent behind what you're doing. But it goes back to asking those questions and an intrinsic capacity to learn. If you don't take ownership and go back to the spine, you're going to miss, and by the spine, I mean going back to that seminal researcher or researchers, you're going to miss some really important information and quite easily recycle all the wrong information that you've read by someone's blog post that you took as concrete. I see this all the time. That's my thought.
Well, as somebody who's your co-author on this article, I recall the month that I spent looking at some contemporary research on feedback. And think about that. Sure, I'll get this done in a week or so. Yeah. It took me a month to go through some of the more contemporary research on that article, because more recently, people have taken some of those seminal ideas and they've repackaged them. They have their own bias and they put a new label on it. And that new label has become the new catchword, right? As academics and researchers, we like to label things. We do it ourselves. Our choice, ownership, and voice are authentic learning opportunities, COVA framework. We label things because it's easy. You've got this acronym, or you've got a short couple of phrases or a couple of sentences or even 2 words that summarizes your ideas. But what a lot of people forget is in that summary is a whole bunch of biases. There is a certain perspective. And as researchers, we try to be as unbiased as possible. We try to present everything. And even when we present things, we think that we've done it well enough, but that often isn't necessarily the case. And so as I was looking at that feedback research, there's a new term called feedback literacy. And it's interesting when you look at the feedback literacy, what does that involve? It involves 4 key points that have 6 steps that you have to follow through. Right. And it's a sexy term, feedback literacy. Woo! Educators love that. 2 terms, right? Literacy. We all want to be literate, right? And feedback, we all know what that is. And so that in that simple term, you're conveying this simple solution to a problem that we have, right? But underneath that term is a very multi-layered foundation of ideas. And so I had to go and unpack that feedback literacy. I went back to the original resources to see what they were talking about. And I very quickly realized that there was a certain bias or shift that happened about 5 or 6 years ago, recognizing that there's certain issues that need to be addressed. And within that bias and shift, there was a certain tendency for people to follow the literature in a certain direction. And it wasn't necessarily a direction that we wanted to follow, because our argument was we want to equip our learners, help them grow from a growth mindset to a learner's mindset so that they're able to receive feedback and that they're willing to engage. And then more importantly, help our learners to, adopt that learner's mindset where ownership is a key factor, where they become much more self-directed learners. And that feedback, or what we refer to as feed forward, is then used to help these people to grow. And as they're taking ownership of their learning, they're receiving our encouragement, our coaching, our direction. We're that expert on the side saying, "Oh, watch out for that, careful." We guide and direct them through that learning process, but they are the ones who are doing it. Whereas in that whole feedback literacy idea, it's really, this is what we do to the learner. So it's a shift. They missed a couple key points. And now, as researchers, I would be remiss not to address that key popular term that is in the literature today. But I also had to explain that, well, we're not necessarily going to use that term, because in that term, you've got these 4 key things. We agree with those 4 key things, but we do it in a different context.
Yeah.
We do it in the context of the student being more self-directed, taking ownership. We want the student to own those ideas, the learner to own their own learning. They have to do their own evaluation. They have to do their own analysis. They have to actually then start to synthesize and make those meaningful connections. Whereas that key term was much more teacher focused, or
Yeah.
the students simply did what they were told in a certain way, and when they did respond, they were responding to a prompt. So there was a subtle shift, and I had to point out that subtle shift, and it took several paragraphs to point out that subtle shift. And one of the challenges that you and I are going to face, people might miss that subtle shift
Yeah.
as they pass ideas forward. So even a good idea that
Yes.
is captured in one or two terms can be a recycled wrong if you don't go back to those primary sources, right? And it's not necessarily a recycled wrong, it's a recycled bias that is in that
Ah,
wrong that makes it wrong, right? So there's these layers that a lot of people don't realize are happening, and as researchers, we write things in such a way to not necessarily be unbiased, even though we say we're biased. No, we are making an argument
yeah.
in the way that we write things. We do have an agenda. We are promoting an idea, even though we say, well, no, this is just neutral and we're just in it for the good of society. Everybody knows everybody has an agenda. And so you have to actually allow people to see that agenda, that's where you're guiding direct them. Because if you don't, you end up having that issue that we talked about earlier on. You've got, people repeating a cliche,
Yeah.
which is a recycled wrong, and then people arguing over an idea which really isn't worth an argument.
Yeah.
So yeah, we've talked. No, so how do we fix this? How do we fix this? Right, the ownership. How do we get people to move the learner's mindset? This is where I think we might be able to help people.
Yeah.
Right, both you and I have been working on our study skills course for learner's mindset study skills course, and I think in that approach that we have, that we're going to be making available to everybody for free, because guess what, we're trying to change the world one learner at a time. We can fix this. It's going to take a lot of work. And here's another tangent we can go on. This takes a lot of work. But let me just sort of summarize what we can offer and what we can do to help correct these problems, and then we'll address the work part, because I have another interesting anecdote that talks about a lot of work. Okay, so what can we do to fix it? Well, in our study skills course, we have 6 key steps that we take a look at. We encourage people to start moving away from that fixed mindset thinking, recycling the wrong, looking at cliches, repeating the cliches, to start asking questions. The inquisitive nature needs to be reignited, which is part of the learner's mindset. So you move from the fixed to the growth mindset. What's work is useful. We move that way, but then you move even further to that learner's mindset, which is changing the way you think about learning, changing your approach to learning, which is what we're talking about here, going deeper, those higher levels, and then really taking into account how important the learning environment is that you are in and that you can also create. So that's the learner's mindset. That's the first module. We then take a look at this idea of what's happening now, the information transfer model that we live in. We live in a world where education system is quite behavioristic. There's this, conditioned response. The teacher gives you something, or you're in a work setting and you read something, and you're being tested to see whether or not the HR department is going to sign off on whether or not you're a good person or a good employee. You
Yeah.
regurgitate this information transfer, right? So there's this model, repetition over time. There's key factors. If you read something or watch a video, read something, take effective notes, do a little summary at the end of the day. Within the first 24 hours, if you repeat the exposure to that information 4 to 5 times, you're going to retain stuff. So we know from the science that if you understand how to retain information, it's a simple process. So you can incorporate behavioristic notions to help you simply engage and remember stuff.
Yeah.
Once you do that, or in order to do that, you have to be able to read effectively. And our education system gets people to the point where they can read comprehensively, meaning, yeah, I can read the sentence, I can understand what it means, I can define the terms, but do I really know what it means when that sentence is buried in a paragraph of other ideas? See, we argue you have to go well beyond that foundational comprehensive based reading, and we're not the only ones. Mortimer Adler, in his book How to Read a Book, makes the argument you've got to move beyond that foundational comprehensive level, grade 3, grade 4, grade 5, and move into a meaning making level, higher
Yeah.
order thinking, where you start to analyze, you start to synthesize, evaluate, and really move things in a deeper fashion. So that is sort of that reading level. In that reading level, you also have to take a look at that notion of note taking. How do we take notes? Most people write longhand and just keep on writing. Well, guess what? When you're writing, you're not listening. So you have to be able to very quickly summarize one or two key words, right? And effective notes can be done in 3/4 of a page in an hour and a half lecture, right? And so you have to learn how to effectively use, a note-taking method that allows you to listen, and then you emphasize the key points. And that's part of that information transfer model. And then once you've got those ideas in place, your study skills have to fall into place, right? The quizzing, the self-quizzing, the repetitive quizzing, the repetition over time, which we talked about earlier on, part of that information transfer model, the comparing apples and oranges, right? If you already know something, do you need to keep on reading? And we have to move people away from those foundational mistakes that they do in studying. Highlighting, rereading, this doesn't work. You have to start to encode information. You have to do an interleave practice where you do different things at different times in a repetition over time practice. Those foundational study skills that we see that are happening are being done by the teacher to the student, whereas the student are the one, or the learners are the ones who have to actually adopt all these skills and do those things on their own. And then that valuable class time, or that valuable time of engagement where you're working together in groups, can be done to go much further, right? So you've got that factor. And then you've got to put all these pieces together where you as a learner become self-directed and you take ownership, right? So we have an approach. We have a learner's mindset, study skills, 6-module course where we can help people move into an environment where they can go much further, go much deeper, and stop the recycling of the wrong. So we can do that. We can do that. But there's some challenges with that. What are some of the challenges you see with that? That we're making all this stuff available for free for people. What are some of the challenges you're seeing in that?
Even before I get to challenges, you know what I'm thinking about? You call it study skills, and I think about how learning is iterative, and this is more of a learning how to learn course.
Yeah.
Because, study skills is going to appeal to the broader masses, but you really have to take an intricate look at your thinking and your approach and the environment. Where do you exist in that? And this is where challenge starts to come in. Are you willing to challenge yourself enough to free flow and get in there and dive in and figure out who you are as a learner? You're going to run across that if you go from a growth mindset only, or a fix to a growth to a learner's mindset, which embodies so much more. A learner's mindset, a learner has choice, ownership, and voice, authentic learning opportunities, significant learning environment. I could go on, but you have to really take an inner look at yourself. Not everybody's going to be ready to do that. Are you really ready to learn how to learn? Are you really ready to engage in those things that might make you uncomfortable? That saying that's been going around for about 1.5 years now, get comfortable being uncomfortable. That is when you're growing and learning. So the first part of, what you call the study skills course, which I'm thinking learning how to learn course, is that it's challenging yourself to be able to do something differently. So, getting away from the default switch of turning on what you think and copy pasting your life and what you think and writing it down and giving it to someone else. How do I then go back and challenge my own assumptions, assertions, my own biases, and make that connection to, I really want to know how to learn. I want to know how to get there, right? Making that cross into that intrinsic capacity to learn, inquisitivism, as you say, is not easy. So if you can get past that hump, I think the rest will be gravy. So that's one challenge. The second challenge, when I think about this, is the realism of it, right? Not only are you having to challenge your own assumptions and thinking, but now it's time to figure out a different way, a different method than what you're used to. So if you're used to highlighting and you're used to keywords, and I highlight things just to stick them out in my mind when I need them, but I don't actually highlight to learn. I highlight things so it's a keyword I'll remember to speak about later in a presentation or something along those lines, right? There's a totally different way of thinking and doing things if you allow yourself to be real. You really take in those opportunities and run with it and get out of your own head. Step away from your own head for a minute and see the other side. And how do you do that? You have to change your thinking about learning. And that might require a behavioral shift first. I don't know. Maybe sometimes there are some things, I'll just give an example. My husband wants me to go float the river this this year for a vacation. I have got to get out of my own headspace and say there might be snakes in the bottom of this river. That's fine. Just go with the flow. You can get a tube with I just got to get out of my own head for a second. I can sit in the tube and float this river, the Comal River in West Texas. I got to get out of my own headspace for that. But I'll bet once I go and I test it out and try it, I'm going to love it and want to go back. Right? It's kind of the same thing cycling back to our earlier conversation. I can't even imagine researching or writing an article or doing any type of work without going back to those seminal authors, right? So you do have to kind of change your thinking, which then, in turn will change your approach to some things. But that takes time. So that's another challenge. This takes time. But if you trust the process, you're real with yourself, you challenge your own assumptions and assertions and your biases, you can make that shift. I did, and I'm probably one of those most stubborn individuals you'll ever meet when it comes to what I think I know. But so those are some challenges I see right up front. Another thing, and I'm thinking about educators, my background's in public education. I think that I don't have time for this. I don't have time to think, I don't have time to do this. But my thought is, you're focused on these knowledge and skills and standards and competencies and objectives and all these things. But if you take the time to work harder, not smarter, you can actually work more efficiently in the space that you're giving, and think about, some of the outcomes-based opportunities and outcomes-based, and I'm talking about learning experiences that you can embody into this experience. If you look at it from a perspective of, I'm not teaching to the standards, I'm teaching to the life of the student and all of the, who they're going to become and how are they going to best get there. My point with that is there's better ways to do things than we're doing them now. We're teaching to a standard. It's killing education. And I'd venture to say it's hurting our students. Why? I see this in higher education. I get honor students who are doing exactly what you say they're doing. And you didn't say that, but you're saying recipe regurgitation model of teaching and learning. I see this all the time. It's scary. It's frightening. Why? Because doing something different is frightening. Well, guess what? If we're never going to make that transition, never going to make that change, then we're going to continue to be upset that our students aren't able to ask questions, aren't able to think for themselves, aren't able to challenge a testimony or an article that they've read or go back to a seminal author. We are perpetuating the problem ourselves. So until we're ready to make that shift, and yeah, there might be some time up front that you have to take to make that shift. But think about the world of change you're going to do in your own environment, and then students that come to your classroom, where you go and who you want to become. Like that's worth the time to me. I'd rather do that than be recycling the wrong.
You've really identified some key things that I wouldn't mind just sort of addressing and clarifying. And the reason I say clarifying is that, this goes back to even the terminologies. I've called it the study skills course, because guess what? That's what people think of when it comes to learning. Learning is all about studying. No, the information transfer model is all about study. Working harder is all about studying. Working harder is doing all the hard things, doing a lot of hard stuff, perhaps unnecessarily. But if we work smarter and we're more efficient and we engage these better forms of learning,
yes,
we learn how to learn better, which is working smarter, not harder.
Yeah.
And our system perpetuates the model of working harder. The honors students that you have coming into the honors college are used to working hard. They're the hardest working, brightest students, or they just work hard and they're used to working hard. And if you can show them a way that they can work smarter, more effectively, and that they already have that hard work ethic, but if you can make them more efficient by working smarter, by helping them change their approach to thinking about learning, change their approach to learning how to learn, and really maximizing the fact that the learning environment is an amazing tool that you can leverage to work smarter, not necessarily harder, right? So the important thing here is that we have a model based on working harder that isn't efficient. And even our labels can actually contribute to that. And the reason we called it, or the reason I argue we should call our program the study skills, is guess what? That's what most people think. It's the wrong, it's a recycled wrong. Our study skills label is a recycled wrong. But we have to actually use that to get people into that thought process so
Yeah.
that we can start to change their thinking about learning.
Mhm.
So, it's an amazing world that we live in. You and I spend more time than most people reading books and articles.
Yes.
And a lot of my students will go, "Oh, Dr. H," or people I talk to, this young guy that I was talking to, and sharing some ideas about, this idea, which was right or wrong. He did say to me personally, he says, I don't know, I can't read all the stuff that you read. Like it's going to take me a year to go through that article. And I said, no, it's not, because I've learned how to read very effectively as a
Yeah.
researcher. There's a certain process, a thing that we do. You look at certain things first, look at an outline.
Yeah.
It's a process.
Mhm.
As researchers, we've learned a way to think, a way to explore, and not just even as researchers. I think people like yourself and myself, we live in a different space in terms of learning. Learning is the making of meaningful connections. It's not the increase of knowledge or information, or the regurgitation of knowledge or information, or the demonstration of skill, that from information you've received from an expert. Sure, you need to get the information, but it's what you do with it. It's that
Right.
meaningful connection making, right? And because we've moved to that higher level of thinking, where we evaluate, where we analyze, where we start to synthesize, and then you do it all over again, repeatedly, constantly, continually evaluating, continually analyzing, and continually synthesizing ideas to make it your own, to take ownership. Because we do that, we're able then, when we look at an article or a book, I can glean information out of a book so rapidly. And then when I look at ideas, I go back, recycle, go back, explore,
Yeah.
go deeper, go deeper. And I'm going back to those primary sources. Who is that person really quoting?
Yeah.
Are they going back? Are they going back to Dewey, or are they going back to, maybe they're going back to Augustine. Maybe they're going back to the Stoic. If you start tracing it back, and then you
Yeah.
finally get back to that original source, and some of the original sources of our thinking might trace back to Aristotle or the Stoics
Yeah.
or to Plato,
Yeah.
right? It's shocking when you think about that a lot of our new ideas are recycled old ideas. And as we're building on these new ideas, there's a tendency to recycle the wrong, because you've got the wrong interpretation, because you haven't gone deep enough or looked at enough sources. So we can help our learners understand how to learn how to learn.
Yeah.
And it's an exciting process.
Mhm.
So you've identified several issues, several problems. I think there's one other issue and problem, and this is something maybe we can look to pull these ideas together and wrap things up. Very recently, in one of my classes, we had a conversation about ChatGPT. ChatGPT is the most amazing tool. I use this tool on a daily basis, and I ask complicated questions, and it can save me hours of research time, because I can ask it to go and hunt and look for things that, based on the AI,
Mhm.
algorithm, it'll just hunt and look for things. And the more specific my questions are, the more I get information back, and I can refine and glean. And it's
Mhm.
this ongoing iterative process: question, better question, better question, better information. And I can look at big pictures and drill them down. So it's this amazing, wonderful research tool that saves me time. You know,
Mhm.
because I'm an old man, there was a time where I hung out in the stacks in the library for hours, for
Mhm.
hours. And I don't know do you remember those times? You're a little bit younger than
Oh,
me.
yeah. No, yeah, I
Yeah.
do. I
But
did too.
now people spend hours on the internet
Oh,
hunting
yeah.
and searching, right? We don't necessarily physically have to go to the stacks. Well, we do for some of the older stuff, because not everything's digitized, right? But anyway, so ChatGPT can save me, and just this is an inordinate amount of time. Wonderful tool. Use it. Love it. It's getting better and better. For me, it's amazing.
Mhm.
A lot of other people are concerned.
Yeah.
Okay. A lot of teachers, oh my gosh,
Mhm.
it's going to write papers for students.
Mhm.
Yeah. Well, if you're asking a question that you can simply take and drop into ChatGPT, if your question is an information transfer question, yeah, it's going to give the student everything they need, because you're
Yeah,
not thinking
exactly.
enough to ask a good enough question, a complex question. You have to ask a complex enough question for your learners to be able to then make the meaningful connections and then give you a response. But we don't do that enough. So there's a lot of people are going, oh my gosh, my job's going to go away, because this tool is going to answer all my content-based questions.
Um,
That's the
Time to
problem.
shift the learning environment there, and the
Yeah.
practices.
Yeah. That's a problem. We have to ask better questions as guides, as mentors, as teachers, right? As leaders, we have to ask better questions. But
That's not hard. That's what we do as humans, isn't
yes,
it? Don't we question everything that we do? You know,
we live here. You and I live here, and always looking for a better way, a better
yeah.
question, looking for more efficiencies. But I'm constantly reminded that the system doesn't work that way. I recently had a conversation between several students in my master's program who work at the high school and at higher level, at the college level. Okay. And they were lamenting the fact that these students who should be at that point where they're using higher order thinking have a hard time even using Google, because Google gives them all these responses and they don't know how to figure out which response is useful. And so this one student, one of my students was saying, ChatGPT, it's not a worry. Our students can't ask questions, so it's not going to be an issue for them, right? They don't use it. They don't want to use it because it's too much work to use ChatGPT. But this goes back to the fact that we have established a model of education where it's information transfer. All the answers at the back of the book, but now you aren't supposed to look at it, just regurgitate information. All your answers are in ChatGPT. But we've gotten to the point where students don't even want to think about formulating a question well enough to be able to get an answer.
Well,
That for me was sobering. Think about that. We are at a point where students aren't even willing to use this most amazing tool, let alone ChatGPT. I'm finding out a lot of students don't like using Google because Google gives them too many responses, because they don't know how to actually narrow down a question. They don't know how to actually think critically, analytically. They don't know how to evaluate. They
I'd
don't
like
know
to
how to analyze.
I'd like to add something to that. Just recently, and I'm not going to give the specifics on this, but a director over a Center for Teaching and Learning center had put out some FAQs about ChatGPT, and they were really good. And it was a proactive way to use ChatGPT as an instructor. The rain of fire that came down for that from instructors. Okay, I'm playing the other side here. It is exactly for what you're saying. You are now challenging the questions the basic level recipe and regurgitation questions I am asking. And if you are saying that ChatGPT could be used to answer these questions, don't give a positive emphasis to ChatGPT, because now my students will use that to answer my basic level questions. That's not what they said, but that's what they're thinking. So we have a problem on the other side as well, because for exactly of losing our job because of ChatGPT, it's not just the students' inability to ask questions. It's the instructor's inability to change the level of questioning the learning environment, right? So we have a little bit of a, both sides of the pendulum here. It's just kind of swinging.
And I find this exciting, right? We're talking about problems, but we're also talking about solutions.
Solutions,
Okay.
yeah.
And as people who like to deal with fundamental questions, the exciting thing for me, and I've always been a delusional optimist on this, and you're going to chuckle because what I'm saying is, I've said this many times. We, humanity, human beings, whether you believe we're created or evolved, doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. But we as humans are the most amazing learning entities on the planet. And we can learn and grow and develop regardless of what the system does to us. We'll find a way. And there's enough of us rebels who have asked the questions because we're stubborn, or we're obstinate, or we're just difficult and we want to do things our way, right? There's enough of us who still have figured out how to ask questions regardless of the system. And it's these people who change the world. They really do. Elon Musk isn't somebody who is just regurgitating information, right? You might not like Elon Musk. You might not like what he's doing. You might not agree with him. But my gosh, this guy asks great questions, right? Not only does he ask great questions, but if you've ever seen him in an interview with somebody, he thinks about his answers. And I will never forget that first time I watched him being interviewed by Rogan. And I think I timed it. It was almost he Rogan asked him a question. Excuse me. And Joe Rogan, another person, asked amazing questions. He asked him a really significant question, and Rogan's willing to wait. And Musk almost went for, I think it was 22, 23 seconds before he responded. And Rogan waited. And for me, that was one of those light bulb moments.
Mhm.
My gosh, this guy, he's on one of the most amazing, podcasts there is, right?
Mhm.
That's being watched by more people than any other podcast. And he's thinking almost a half a minute about his answer. And the reason he did think that long is because his answer was pretty sophisticated and complicated. And then within his answer, he then asked another question of Rogan to clarify. So his answer addressed the question that he was given, but he also asked a couple more questions. And then Rogan and him went into a dialogue. Well, what about this? And what about this? And then they were asking each other questions to clarify. That discussion was an exchange of amazing questions that allowed them to go deeper and to evaluate and to analyze. And then what if? Oh, and then synthesize this. And then what about this? Well, that back and forth was this exchange of higher order thinking and questioning that was amazing to watch. And my
Mhm.
respect for people like Rogan, even though he's a vulgar, cursing, dope smoking character, well, he is, but that's he's real. He owns it. He jokes around about that, right? There's other people who run podcasts. One guy, Jimmy Dory, he says, I'm an old dope smoking comedian, right? And here I'm the one asking the questions, right? So we now have sort of a stratification in society of people who ask the right questions, right? And there's sort of this resurgence and emphasis of the importance of asking these right questions. And I think we can help people with the learner's mindset. We've got a process, we've got an approach, and all we're doing is simply reigniting that natural tendency of a 2 or 3 year old to ask questions. Now, I I've had the most amazing several months. A friend of mine's daughter, um, 2.5, she's almost 3. Okay. She's hit a point where it isn't no, 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 or why. Her questions are getting much more significant. Well, but if I have to do this, well, then I'm not going to get that. She's starting to make those meaningful connections, and her questions are getting amazing. She's thinking through certain things. You can see a higher level order of thinking in a 3-year-old
Mhm.
because she's asking questions. And then when her dad gives her a response, she goes deeper and she pushes him further. And then he gives her another response. And if he's cheap on his response, well, then she gives him
Right.
a harder question, right? And I'll recently,
At
I
14
remember,
years
I
old.
remember them going back and forth. At one point, he looks up at me and he's sort of, okay, but we got to go deep here, right? He recognized that if he didn't address her
Yeah.
significant questions in a meaningful enough way, she was just going to keep on drilling down
Yeah.
because she doesn't know, or she hasn't been taught that, well, no, life isn't about asking questions. It's about finding the right answer at the back of the book, right? This young little amazing question machine, this little 3-year-old toddler
Mhm.
is just amazing to watch. I love hanging out with them because of the questions that she asks. Now, I have the privilege of hanging out with different people of, I'm old and my boys are 25 and 27, right? They're older. Anyways, but I have a group of younger adults that have kids ranging from 3 to teenagers, and I have regular opportunities to hang out with 3-year-olds, 5-year-olds, 6-year-olds. I work with a group where I work with the elementary kids. It is amazing if you reignite that passion for asking questions. And I'm also starting to see that questioning at age 3. I see it in kids 4 and 5, but I'm also starting to see that some of the kids that I work with are in grade 3, grade 4. They're starting to recognize, well, that isn't how school works. It isn't
Mhm.
about asking the right question. It's about just giving the right answer, right? So
Mhm.
I'm starting to see that questioning drop off with these kids that I'm working,
Mhm.
but it doesn't take much. It
Mhm.
doesn't take much. I'll ask a key question that forces them to go a little bit deeper and to think. and to ask them a question that they take ownership of and they can apply to their lives, whoo, it changes everything.
Yeah.
As soon as they own it, that's different. Well, now it's important to me. And they will start to ask questions, go deeper. And then you see a dialogue happen between a group of these kids asking each other questions. Well, I don't know about that. I think what Dwayne is saying means this. And they go back and forth. And sometimes once you sort of reignite that learner's mindset, it just changes everything. And my phone just went off, so I apologize for that. So as I said, once you reignite that learner's mindset, it changes everything. And this is what I think we can help everybody to do, right? Our study skills course that we have available, and we have our learner's mindset modules as well. So if we can help people to reignite that amazing, natural, intrinsic capacity to learn, to ask questions, to go deeper, to go, what? Oh, that means I might have to do something different.
Yeah.
That's learning.
That's learning.
Right? That's learning.
I think we can let's do this.
Yeah. Let's keep on going down this path. Now, for the sake of transparency, this is something that a lot of my learners are recognizing. These young kids I'm working with, they have all the time in the world. For them, time isn't an issue. But when you're dealing with people at the high school level, or I'm working with teachers and business people at all levels, right up to 50, 60, time is an issue. Oh, Dr. H, Dwayne, what you're talking about is a lot of work. That's going to take a lot of time. That's not easy. That's really making me uncomfortable. Yeah, that's learning. I think we've forgotten learning does come with cognitive dissonance. Learning does come with a certain level of discomfort. Learning does come with the notion that, oh my gosh, that's going to take some time. You know, I've been on a journey where I'm fixing my knee, and most recently I went back to the doctor or a specialist, and now I'm working on fixing my hip. Even me, somebody who lives in this learner's mindset. I remember walking away from the doctor's office going, oh, I got another 6 to 9 months of hard work. Oh, isn't there a pill for this? Can I just get a shot? You know, I'm going to have to work. It's going to hurt. It's going to take so much time. And this is where the learning idealist in me comes out and says, well, that's the nature of learning. It does take time. But all good things take some time. All good things take effort. All good things can not necessarily make us feel that comfortable initially.
Yeah.
So it's that notion of delayed gratification. We might have to go through some challenges. We might have to go through some difficulty. We might have to question some core ideas. We might have to analyze what recycled wrongs have we embraced.
Yeah.
And we might have to throw out some of those like maybe we stop recycling the wrongs and take them to the dump. Let's stop the recycling process, throw them out, adopt something new.
I read a meme just recently, and it was something along the lines of, what are you holding your own self back from because you won't let go of something else? Right. So what are you holding back? Like, who are you not becoming because you're holding on to this key idea or this thought that is transforming and making you think a certain way? You know, and I thought, gosh, and that was a deep one. And I thought, I have to figure out what I'm holding my own self back from. That's the first challenge, you know, I think, in adopting, or even going, you don't really adopt, immersing yourself in a learner's mindset.
Lots of challenges, but the challenges are exciting. And I'm going to make a connection between a recent visit to the doctor. A recent visit to the doctor that I made. Yeah, even I want a shortcut. You know, I do. But at the same time, it's been, 4 or 5 days. I'm 4 or 5 days into this new regime. I'm working on different things. And I woke up this morning and I'm thinking, oh, wow. Oh, I see a little bit of progress. Okay. That work is going to be worth the effort.
Yeah.
I'm going to restore my health. I'm going to restore my mobility. But if we transfer this back to this idea of really engaging in the learner's mindset, really taking ownership, really understanding what learning is, that making meaningful connections, that we have to look at learning and approach learning in a very different way, utilizing that learning environment, engaging with others, being willing to be uncomfortable, recognizing you've got repetition over time in a good way, not just a behavioristic way, that it's a multifaceted way of learning that will separate you from everybody else and give you the capacity to change your world and change everybody else's world for the better. So we go back to our delusional agenda, right? We're trying to change the world one learner at a time. And we can do that through the learner's mindset. Now, more importantly, we can help everybody out there do these same things through the learner's mindset. And everybody can engage in this ongoing process. Adopting a learner's mindset is much more of adopting the process of continually living in that space. But I think it's worth it. And I think we owe it to the society. I have a group of people I hang out with, and every chance I get, I'm encouraging this type of thinking. And it's exciting to see the potential. It's exciting to see the potential. I had one of my friends, this guy with a 3-year-old, saying, Dwayne, how do I start a school? I want to start my own school. Sometimes you have to be careful where these big ideas are going to take people, right? He's thinking differently. And if you encourage people to explore and get them to recycle those wrongs and start to adopt new ideas, the world becomes a world of opportunity.
Get them to literally recycle those wrongs, get rid of those.
Finish the recycling process. That means at some point you have to deal with them. Right? So recycling often is sort of a reuse, right? Well, there's a point where you stop the reuse and you take them apart, you break them down to the core, and then you recycle or reuse the foundational ideas. Going back to the core. Interesting. So we've got a solution to the world's problems here that we need to promote now, right?
Yes.
I always enjoy these conversations. I think on that note, we'll wrap up for today. Lots of ideas to talk about more in the future. Explore some of these ChatGPT opportunities, go a little bit deeper into the notion of making those meaningful connections. I think we need to really take a look at ownership again. Lots of conversations coming up where we're going to go a little bit deeper and hopefully provide some ideas that can encourage people to make those meaningful connections for themselves.